Good morning. I'm Fenwick Huss, Dean of the Zicklin School of Business, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. Today's topic is leadership and technological innovation during and after the pandemic. Joining me from the Dean's office is Gwen Webb, Associate Dean for Executive Education, and Gwen will moderate the question and answer period. In conversation today, we have Guy Kawasaki, who's a former marketing and brand expert at Apple and Google, and is currently Chief Evangelist at Canva, a graphic design platform. Joining Guy in conversation is Scott Newbert, the Field Chair in Entrepreneurship at the Zicklin School of Business, and Larry Zicklin, former Chairman of Neuberger Berman, an alum of the school and the school's benefactor. I'm also pleased to tell you that Larry is also a professor in our undergraduate honors program. Larry?
Thank you very much, Fenwick. And Guy, welcome. Guy, you've worn so many hats in your life that maybe you could bring us up to date and tell us the road you've traveled from beginning to where you are now as the author of 15 books.
It is the road less traveled. So I was born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii, and I have to go back a little further than you probably want, but in the sixth grade, my sixth grade teacher convinced my parents that I had too much potential to stay in the public school system of Hawaii. Public school system of Hawaii was very challenged back then. So they switched me out from a public school into a private prep school. That led to applying to Stanford. Why I applied to Stanford, looking back, I have no idea, because I know I wouldn't get in today. So I went to Stanford, and then from Stanford, I went to law school, believe it or not, after graduating, because in the mid 70s, if you were Asian American, your parents wanted you to be a doctor, lawyer, or dentist. And I did not want to stick my hand in people's bodies for the rest of my life. So there was law. And I lasted in law school for a grand total of 2 weeks, where I just I don't know, I just hated it. So I dropped out of law school, which is a big deal because, back then, Asian Americans don't drop out of anything. This is the precursor of Tiger Kids. And the following year, I entered the MBA program at UCLA. And after that, while I was in the MBA program at UCLA, I took a part-time job at a jewelry manufacturer counting diamonds, literally counting diamonds. And so after I graduated from the MBA program, while all my peers were going to, Arthur Young and Dean Witter and other companies, I went to a jewelry manufacturer. And in the meantime, my buddy from college went to work for the Macintosh division, and he brought me into the Macintosh division. So I'm living testimony to the career path called nepotism. And after the Macintosh division, I started some software companies. I returned to Apple as Apple's chief evangelist. I left Apple again to start another company. And then I became a writer and a speaker, kind of independent for Ninja, Free Soul. And then Canva reached out to me because they saw that I was using Canva to create graphics. So I've been Canva's chief evangelist for about 7 years. Canva is the online graphic design platform. So it has basically democratized design. So today I am Canva's chief evangelist, Remarkable People podcast creator, and that's it. That's my life in a nutshell.
Well, just to talk about things for 1 second, I don't think students appreciate the law of unintended consequences. In your case, your friend from Stanford goes into a completely different company than you were going into, and your life changes.
Yep.
Can you talk about that for a second?
That is absolutely 100% true. That I started, if you took the extreme, I went from jewelry to a legal education, albeit very shortly. Then I went into the Macintosh division because of nepotism. And then along the way, I wrote 15 books. So if we could go back in a time machine and say, Guy, tell us what you think you're going to do for the rest of your life. There is no way I would have said, well, I'm going to go into jewelry. Then I'm going to go to a hardware company called Apple. Then I'm going to start a software company. Then I'm going to start a VC firm. Along the way, I'll write 15 books. And then one day, a company in Sydney, Australia will notice that I'm using their product and they'll recruit me. And that company has now turned into a $19 billion unicorn, which, by the way, a side theory that you may be interested in is called Guy's Golden Touch. And Guy's Golden Touch is not whatever I touch turns to gold. Guy's Golden Touch is whatever is gold, Guy touches. And so Canva is just a pot of gold. And so my career is completely unplanned. It's really kind of not spontaneous, but reactive, in the sense that I fell in love with Macintosh. I fell in love with Canva. I fall in love, and I fell in love with podcasting. So contrary to maybe traditional career planning, I'm just peripatetic.
My father came from Poland, and he used to say to me in Polish, men think and God laughs.
As Mike Tyson says, a plan is as good until the first punch lands, right?
He's fighting again, by the way.
Yeah, I know. You
might regret this. So what criteria do you take into consideration when you change paths a little bit? When you go from the jewelry business to the Macintosh business to writing books to podcasts, what are you looking for? What are the clues?
Well, I mean, that implies consciousness and intelligence and analysis. That would be an incorrect presumption. Basically, I just fell in love. I was using an Apple II. I fell in love with computers, going from IBM Selectric correctable typewriters to an Apple II word processor. So I fell in love with the concept of personal computers. And then the leap from Macintosh over Apple II, that was like, the scales were removed from my eyes, the waters parted, angels started singing because of the user interface. So I fell in love with Macintosh. So my career is a series of falling in love, not a series of doing a careful analysis of the opportunities in a space or a company.
But as you say, you fell in love after you understood the implications of this movement from Macintosh.
That is
generations.
That is true. Although I will tell you that I've fallen in love many times incorrectly. So, you could make the case, honestly. At the start of my career, I fell in love with Macintosh. That was in 1983. And 7 years ago, in 2013 or 2014, I fell in love with Canva. So between 83 and 2006 or 7 or something like that, I was flailing.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. You used the word evangelist.
Yes.
In your opening remark. Can you tell us what an evangelist is and what that person does?
Yes. Yeah. So evangelism comes from a Greek term meaning bringing the good news. So what an evangelist does is bring the good news. Jesus, perhaps you've heard of him. He brought the good news of eternal life. Guy brought the good news of increased creativity and productivity with the Macintosh user interface. Guy currently brings the good news of being a better communicator by using Canva to create graphics. The difference between evangelism and sales, I might make the case that evangelism is the purest form of sales, is that typically a salesperson has his or her income quota bonus at top of mind, whereas an evangelist has the other person's benefit, the other person's goodwill, the other person's improvement at top of mind. So when I convince people to use Macintosh, when I evangelize Macintosh, I truly did believe that I was increasing their creativity and productivity. So it was good for me, but it was also good for them. And today, when I evangelize Canva, I believe that Canva really will make you a better communicator and designer. So it's good for me again, but it's also good for you. Whereas sales, I think, is primarily concerned about what's good for the salesperson.
Do you think most salespeople believe in their product and believe they're doing good by marketing this product?
Well, it depends on their degree of self-awareness. There's a lot of crap out there, and there's a lot of people selling crap. So either they're okay with selling crap, or they don't know it's crap. But there is a lot of crap out there. Having said that, I think that there are products and services and companies. And let's get out of high tech for something. I believe if I were working for a company like Yeti, the coolers and the cups and all that, I truly would believe if I'm working for Yeti that we have the finest coolers and the finest flasks and the finest cups. I think that's legitimate.
And what happens if you're working for an automobile company and you're selling Audis or Lexuses or Chevrolets?
Well, it depends on which automobile company, right? Although I have to say, honestly, that the automobile industry has progressed so far that you can't really make a mistake, right? I mean, within reason, you might have thought, well, back when I was in high school, this is the mid 70s, Toyota was a piece of crap. It was as if those cars were made out of recycled beer cans. But today, Toyota and Lexus is the leading edge of quality and customer satisfaction. If you look at the Korean cars today, there's nothing wrong with a Kia or a Hyundai. So the auto industry, I'd say, has really raised the bar in general. Now, you could be like, part of being an evangelist is you are affiliated with a product that is differentiated. So I think the company that has the potential for being the most evangelistic is probably Tesla, because Tesla stands for electronic, it stands for automation, it stands for all these things that are not quite where most car companies are yet.
I wonder what the competition will look like for Tesla 5 years from now. Look, I remember it was the Japanese industry, the auto industry, that converted the American auto industry. In the 50s and 60s and maybe the 70s, we were making very poor quality cars. And the Japanese and the Germans taught us to make better cars because otherwise we couldn't compete. I wonder if that's going to happen to Tesla now.
Well, I would say that Elon Musk single-handedly converted cars to electric. That if it weren't for Elon Musk, we would still be driving only gasoline cars. Greta Thunberg would be just pulling her hair out. She already is pulling her hair out, but she really would be pulling her hair out. And I think he single-handedly changed just like Steve Jobs single-handedly changed the computer business by changing the expectations of people to have a graphical, intuitive user interface. Elon Musk has changed the expectations that, I think you expect a electric car to go 300 miles and not pollute and be able to be charged in a few hours. He did that single-handedly.
Do you measure success as an evangelist the same way we measure success in marketing, by revenues and profits?
At some level, any for-profit company has to have profit. Otherwise, you simply die, and that's a failure. But I would add, I would not say it's different. I would just add something more about, sort of the psychic space that a brand or company occupies, that it's not simply profitable, but it also is changing the world or denting the universe or making lives better. So to take an extreme example, you could take a private equity bank or an investment bank and say, well, they're extremely profitable, and, huge volumes of money go through them and all that. But would you say that an investment bank or a private asset manager, is denting the universe and changing the world? That's a little trickier.
I think that's true, but they brought a lot of companies public that ordinarily wouldn't be public, giving them the capital to survive, to grow, to employ people.
I don't know, but I have a hard time believing people who work at Goldman Sachs wake up every day think, how can I make the world a better place?
I think that's fair. We used to say our job was to make rich people richer.
A higher calling.
I'm not so sure. You talked about Canva I can't remember if it was one of your books or one of your speeches, about democratizing design.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, pre-Canva or BC, before Canva, I think the world was dominated in graphics by Adobe. And with Adobe, taking Photoshop and Illustrator as examples, these were back in the days when you bought software. These were $700-800 products. When you booted Photoshop, or still when you boot Photoshop, you're basically presented with a blank screen with dozens of tools around it. And so it is to use a construction analogy, Canva is more like prefabricated housing. You buy the kit and everything's there, cut to spec, and you just put it together. Whereas Photoshop is more like you go to the lumber yard and you pick out 2x4s and 2x6s and sheetrock and all that. And so what Canva did is it enabled people who did not have the ability to be a general contractor to create beautiful graphics. The metaphor here is that there are only, I don't know, several hundred design types, where a type would be a presentation, a flyer, a book cover, an album cover, Pinterest graphics, Instagram graphics, Facebook graphics, business cards, thank you cards, infographics. So there are about, several hundred of those. Within any design type, let's say presentations, there are hundreds of templates already created. So you would go to the presentation template type of Canva. There would be hundreds of examples. You'd pick one, change the text to your company, and you would be done in minutes.
And is that how it's being used today?
Yes.
Is it mostly by business, mostly by individuals?
Well, it's mostly by people who need to communicate, and so, if you are active in your PTA and the PTA needs a flyer, you may be an investment banker during the day, but if you're working on the PTA and they need a flyer for the Halloween party, you use Canva. Is that a corporate use? Not really, but it's not just kids making simple graphics. It's people really doing stuff that's high end. And also, I think in many corporations, before Canva, you had to submit a request to the graphics department to create you the flyer, to create you the infographic. And there was a queue of products or queue of things that the graphics department wanted you wanted them to do, and you had to wait in line. Well, today the scenario is you boot graphic and you boot Canva and you roll your own. And so it's about efficacy and not being at the whim of a department that's understaffed and over demanded.
It's really a convenience. One of the overriding thrusts of this series of webinars has been the pandemic and our reaction to the pandemic.
Yes.
Can you talk about Canva's reaction to the pandemic, the effect on Canva, how it reacted itself to the pandemic?
Yes. So Canva, like every other organization in the world, went fully virtual. So we have offices in Austin, Sydney, China, and the Philippines. So like everyone else, we were in virtual. We also added collaborative features to Canva, because before, maybe the small group of designers or the people who needed the graphic could get in a room and discuss it, but now everybody's at home, and home could be thousands of miles apart. So we went collaborative online also. But I think the bigger picture in the pandemic is that it has just changed people's expectations and changed people's work habits. And I don't think we're ever going to go back to pre-pandemic, let's all fly to Vegas, go to a big conference. Let's all have a Monday morning staff meeting where we all shuffle into a room, and each person gets up and uses PowerPoint or Canva to give a weekly report. I don't think that day is ever coming back.
That would change a lot of what's going on in this world.
And I think for the better. I think that, if anything, a lot of bad things have happened because of the pandemic, but I think that the digitization of business processes has accelerated, and we're going to look back as the pandemic as something that altered the arc of business productivity.
I would think the CEO of United Airlines or American Airlines would be staying up nights worrying about that.
Larry, I would think so too, but there is such a pent-up demand for recreational travel that as soon as people get the impression that it's safe, I think it's going to come roaring back. Now, I, as a business traveler, even before the pandemic, travel to me was an onerous burden. I did not want to get on a plane. I did it because if the conference is in Las Vegas, you go to Las Vegas to speak, right? But I wasn't going to Las Vegas to have a good time and see Blue Man and, get drunk and gamble. So recreational travel will probably come zooming back, and the United Airlines CEO is going to be pleasantly surprised. But I think business travel, boy, that's challenging. Now, I don't know
Now,
from United standpoint whether the business travel is the bulk of their profit or recreational travel is. So I don't
my,
know
rec-
that number.
my recollection is business travel is the bulk of profits for most airlines.
Oh, well, then they should worry. Yeah.
I noticed that Canva, which now has, as I looked it up, 55 million monthly active users, has 130% year-over-year rise in revenue. That's an extraordinary number. How does this happen in 1 year?
Well, it's not because of me. I would say that Canva, it's, it's one of those things that everything came together that uh, Canva has enabled people to create design at a time that social media was exploding. So to be effective in social media, you really do need to use graphics. So that was good timing. And the pandemic forcing people to collaborate at a distance, that was good timing. And I take no credit for this whatsoever, but the founders and management of Canva, I have never worked for a company that more relentlessly pursued perfection of every business product than Canva, a process than Canva. So from the onboarding to the stock photography selection, to the design of templates, to the iOS versus Android, this sounds like I'm bragging, but I'm kind of removing myself. I've never worked for a group of people who were more driven to perfection. So, as I said, Guy's golden touch, whatever's gold, Guy touches.
Let me give you another statistic that might interest our audience that I'm going to look at here. Last June, Canva raised money at a $6 billion valuation for the company. Yeah. And they just raised $71 million in another capital raise, let's say 9 months later, at a $15 billion valuation for the company. That's 2.5 times what it was 9 months ago. That to me is a number that I haven't seen before. Go up 2.5 times in 9 months in a valuation. And somebody is willing to invest at that rate.
Yes.
Again, just the confluence of product design, product revenue, or anything else there to know.
Well, I would say that, other than inserting the word, quote, just, I would say that that's kind of an accurate statement, that it was a confluence of a great product at the right time, serving a need that was exploding. And, sort of the self-efficacy, democratization. I can't wait for the design department. I'm not going to submit an RFP. I'm not going to check out 3 graphic designer vendors who are going to each send me a proposal. I'm just going to boot Canva and go. It was just perfect all around. It was, it was hitting a grand slam home run in the World Series. It just couldn't get better. And I'm not saying it's luck either, because those people, or we, work our asses off. I mean, it is.
Sounds like a remarkable company.
It is a remarkable company. But there's a lot of lessons from Canva, but one lesson is this, that 2 people in a spare bedroom in Perth, Australia, have created a $16 billion company. So there's a lot of things to take from that. One is that, 2 people in a garage or a spare bedroom or a dorm can still create great companies. And the second lesson is you don't have to be in Silicon Valley. It may be helpful, but it is certainly not sufficient and necessary to be in Silicon Valley.
Isn't that a real lesson for the future? In this world of technology, you don't have to be anywhere if you have the right idea.
That's true. The world is flat. And there are certain advantages. I mean, people say, well, you have to be in Silicon Valley to be a tech startup. That is not true, but for all the benefits. So you think, the benefits of being in Silicon Valley is you're 2 miles from all the venture capitalists. There's all this infrastructure. There's a way of thinking in the Valley that failure is forgiven and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, okay, that's the upside. A large talent pool from Stanford and Cal. Okay, that's all upside. But the downside is in the war for talent, you are competing with Apple, Google, Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, Hewlett Packard, Oracle, and Tesla for graduates of Stanford. So that's the bad news. So it's not all, unicorns and pixie dust being in Silicon Valley.
So let me just stay on Canva for just one moment. Canva spent a lot of money and contributed its product free to education during the pandemic.
Yes.
Do you know what was behind that thinking?
Well, the thinking is that you get people using this product as they're young, and as they graduate and go on into their careers, they're going to take it with them into the companies that they work for. This is not unlike what Apple did when Apple got Apple IIs and Macintoshes into colleges. So Apple had something called the Apple University Consortium, and they picked about 20 schools like Carnegie Mellon and really priced it extremely competitively so that undergraduates would be using Macintosh. And when they, graduated and went to Goldman Sachs and wherever they went to, that they would, be Macintosh literate and want Macintoshes in their future jobs. So it was a way of, it was one big Trojan horse, basically.
That was a hell of a Trojan horse.
Yes, it was.
I just want to turn to Scott for a second. We were talking about the pandemic. How did the Field Center react to the pandemic? And did you change the ways the Field Center operates?
Yeah, thanks, Larry. So we did some of the same things that Guy alluded to, and like probably most of the folks in our audience did as well. We went fully virtual. We had to immediately sort of, shift our way of thinking from, as Guy pointed out, having 6 or 7 people sitting in a room talking to how are we going to do this online and how can we do this through the Zoom technology that we had. But that was sort of the short-term shift, right? It was sort of, deciding how to do the damage control that was brought upon us, on March 12th. And then as we moved forward, we started to think about 2 things. One was, how do we use this as an opportunity? And this is something else that I think Guy rightly pointed out, is that these shocks to the system, although they bring oftentimes a lot of damage along with them, they also bring opportunities, right? So what are the things that we can do as a result of this, and take advantage of some of the changes in the way in which people work and the way in which people learn in our case. So whereas Canva benefited from the pandemic, in one way, we benefited in the sense that students are learning differently. So we were in the midst of developing a graduate certificate, and when the pandemic hit, we sort of did an about face. And to Guy's point about good timing, the timing was good because we hadn't fully developed everything, and we immediately began to build it around the realities of what we think the future of work and education is going to be in the next 6-8 months and perhaps beyond. I share Guy's view that we're not going to go back to where we were, that we are going to be in a situation where more people are going to be doing more on their time. So a lot of asynchronous, a lot of online, but having some sort of touch points, because I don't think that that people are going to be satisfied just sort of bowing out of social life. I think students, I think coworkers, I think we're all going to need some sort of social interaction and mentoring. So we've built some of that into our system. But we're still right now planning for the return to our campus. So as people in the audience may or may not know, Baruch has been basically shut down for over a year. We're targeting fall of this year for a return to campus and some in-person learning, but we're trying to figure out what the right balance is. We know not all students are going to want to or be able to return, and so we're trying to, and right now we're sort of piloting some different learning models in our current courses to see what is the right makeup between asynchronous and synchronous learning, and how are people using technology, and what technologies are available, things like Canva, to make our job easier. in terms of how we deliver content. So we're doing a lot of experiments and very much trying to walk the walk that we teach our students, that times of uncertainty are actually good times for entrepreneurs.
Well, there is a school of thought that says that pandemics or shocks accelerate entrepreneurship. Guy, it sounds to me like you agree with that.
I absolutely do. In the movie The Graduate, where Mr. Robinson says plastics is the key. I think the key word for next year is hybrid. Hybrid classroom, hybrid meeting, hybrid companies, everything. It's going to be a hybrid. Hybrid is the new plastics.
Well, it better take place at Baruch because we have more students now than any time in our history. I think we have something like 19,500 students that we've never had before. So there better be hybrids because they're not going to fit in that building. So we're going to do. So, Guy, let me ask you, if you had a crystal ball, where do you think the technological and entrepreneurial changes might take place in the future? In what field? Is it finance? Is it medicine? Is it teaching? Is it production, supply lines? What are you thinking about?
Well, I think the pandemic is such a shock to the system that everything you just mentioned will be affected, like the supply chain. I mean, who's going to have a product line with 50 SKUs with 50 configurations each, made in China, 6,000 miles away, possibly in a war with us, whether trade or physical? I mean, that changes the supply chain. You already know how it's changing education. I don't know what's not going to change. Maybe In-N-Out Burger, but other than that, the whole thing's going to change.
I would think that leaves great opportunity for entrepreneurs.
Oh
yeah. And Scott, it sounds like you agree with that also, that the world is really burgeoning with a need for entrepreneurs in this period of time.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would agree with everything Guy just said. I don't know that there's going to be a part of society that will be untouched. I mean, even the example of In-N-Out Burger, of course, they have supply chains that may well be, disrupted now too. So I think it's, notwithstanding all the negative effects that we've all felt personally and otherwise from this pandemic, but I do think it's an exciting time to be an entrepreneur, because these are the times when two guys can get together in a room and create something new, that if you address the pain points in the right way, and some of that's luck and some of that's hard work and some of that's timing, but there's an opportunity to really change the world in positive ways. And we've seen that particularly in medicine with therapeutics and with we had a guest on here a few months ago, I guess, about providing PPE during the pandemic, and a lot of initiatives like that that we've seen. So either direct responses to the pandemic or just indirect that have just opened up as a result of the changes that we've made in our lives. But I do think it's an exciting time to be around and to be in this space.
If I can just put in a plug for our July webinar, the subject is going to be medicine after the pandemic, and what will medicine look like post-pandemic, as if anyone exactly knows.
Well, I'll tell you, mRNA is certainly a game changer.
Would you define mRNA, please?
Well, it's how these vaccines are now created by altering RNA. That's when did you ever going back a year, who among us thought that we would have, well, it depends on how you count J&J, but who among us and AstraZeneca, but who among us would thought we'd have 2 or 3 vaccines and 3 million Americans would be vaccinated every day? I didn't. Not at all. That's totally a game changer, and that's going to change medicine for a long time.
Yeah, I'm just starting a new book on that same subject. I think it's called "The Woman Who Broke the Code," about mRNA and CRISPR and all the rest of that. So,
yeah.
but I haven't opened it yet. Guy, I know you do some teaching. What do you tell your students about the future? What do you, what's your message to them?
I think that the message about the future is that nobody can really predict it. I don't know why. Uh, I hate this question when I'm asked. I hate listening to people's answer because, frankly, we just don't know. And I guess within maybe 9 to 12 months, you can kind of predict the future. But anything beyond 12 months, I think you're just making it up. I remember back in the day when everybody thought, literally everybody thought that MySpace would be dominant, and so dominant that it was positioned as the operating system of the internet. I mean, wrap your mind around that. MySpace was going to be the operating system of the internet. Well, it didn't quite work out that way. And so uh, I just think it's very foolish. And I hope that there are two people in a garage, or two people in a spare bedroom, or two people in a dorm that are just not constrained by what the so-called experts are saying, and they create the product that they want to use. And lo and behold, they're not the only two nutcases who want that product, because that just described, I think, Google, Yahoo, Apple, at least Facebook too. I mean, I think that great tech companies start because two people decide to create the product that they want to use, and lo and behold, it's not just the two of them. And so that's my theory of entrepreneurship.
Well, then I'm going to push you a little bit further. If you were the dean of a business school today, forget the curriculum that's been taught for 1,000 years. What would you be teaching?
I would be teaching behavioral economics, the social psychology of influence and persuasion. I would be teaching human interface design, and I would be teaching the soft skills of management and motivation. Looking back, when I was in school, both undergraduate and MBA, I always thought that the hard part of being in business would be the quantitative stuff, the operations, research, finance, all that kind of stuff. That's the hard stuff. And the easy stuff would be the OB stuff that, managing people is easy. I'm a natural at that. But finance and operations and accounting, that's the hard stuff. And I have to say that at the end of my career now, I was completely 180 degrees wrong, that the easy stuff is finance and law and accounting, and the hard stuff is the OB, motivation, recruiting stuff. So I think you should teach the soft stuff. The hard stuff, in terms of quant, I think you can just hire that. The hard stuff is the management.
As somebody once said, in my recruiting, I spend enormous amounts of time doing it, and I'm right 1 out of 2.
and you only remember the time you're right? A selective memory.
We're wrong.
Can
Go back in your career a little. What are you most proud of in your career?
Probably working in the Macintosh division. That was a magical moment. That was Scheherazade. That was just magic. To say that I worked for or with Steve Jobs is magic. And now, it was not always comfortable. It was not always pleasant, but that was a magical time. To use a football analogy, I would say, and I'm going to really date myself, and most people won't know what the hell I'm talking about, but I would say that, people who played for Vince Lombardi probably would feel the same way, right? That if you played for the Green Bay Packers back then and Vince Lombardi, that was a magical time. Working for Steve Jobs was a magical time.
But I wonder if you thought so at the time.
No. And correct me if I'm wrong, but playing for the Packers and Vince Lombardi was a magical time. I would not say that playing for the New England Patriots and Belichick was a magical time, although he won more Super Bowls, right? I don't know. It's hard to explain sports analogies break down in a business setting very quickly, actually.
Can I ask you one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over to my friend
Okay.
Gwen. If you had to change one thing in your life going back, what would you change?
Well, at a superficial, insipid level, I will tell you that I never should have quit Apple because that
It would have
costs
been worth a couple of bucks.
I would, yeah. I mean, there would be a Kawasaki School of Business at Stanford, just like there's a Zicklin School of Business in New York. Uh, but that's a semi-facetious answer. I got to tell you that so there were these tactical mistakes, right? So I quit Apple twice. I turned Steve Jobs down for a third job, so that's 3 strikes. The person who funded Yahoo in the early days of Yahoo called me up and asked me if I wanted to interview for the first CEO position of Yahoo, and I said that it was too far to drive. So I think if you add up all those mistakes, that's maybe $2.5 billion, which I could build a business school for that, right, Larry? So I think you're muted, Larry.
Not at Baruch.
No, not at Baruch. Takes more than $2.5 billion.
I'm kidding.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I never funded a business school. So that's at a one level. But looking back, I think this is human nature. Even that, I can't say that I have these deep regrets, because at the end of your life, you are just a composite of all the experiences that you have. And some of the worst experience turned out to be some of the most valuable experiences. And I'll use a semi-facetious example. Well, this is a really facetious example. So a couple of years ago, my family went to Hawaii for Christmas vacation. And we rented a boat. So on New Year's Eve, we went from one part of the island to where all the fireworks happen on the other part of the island. And let's just say that with hindsight, maybe that wasn't such a wise move and the captain shouldn't have done it, because there was kind of a small craft warning because of weather. But we did it anyway. And coming back, basically everybody got sick and was throwing up on the boat. So at the time we thought, oh, what a horrible, stupid mistake. We could have drowned. We all started vomiting and all that. But then now, years later, guess what story we talk about? It wasn't about the great meal at Roy's. It wasn't about, I don't know, surfing. It was about that horrible, horrible, seasick New Year's Eve boat ride. And so how do you look back? I think it's a great story. And it just shows you that, the bad shit often leads to the most interesting stories and experiences.
I often look back at my own career and say to myself, it's amazing that I survived all the mistakes I made. Gwen, you have some questions from the audience.
Yes, we have quite a few questions. And a lot of them are for Guy. And one of them refers to your experience with Steve Jobs. Yes. And the experience you had and the introduction to innovation and creativity. And the question is, how have those experiences translated later in your life? And what advice do you have for a college student just entering the tech industry in this regard?
Okay. So the Steve Jobs, everything you've read or seen about Steve Jobs is true. Okay. Everything. So he was very difficult to work for, extremely demanding. I literally was scared because I saw him rip people in public, and I vowed that I would never be the person that Steve Jobs ripped in public. So contrary to every theory of HR about positivity and mutual goals and open communications and transparency, Steve did none of that. Basically, he ruled by fear. And I can tell you, at least in this instance, fear works. The fear of being humiliated was a very powerful motivating factor. Now, I don't want all of you be taking notes and saying, okay, when I'm CEO, I'm going to rule by fear because Steve Jobs did it the way, because the odds of you being Steve Jobs is practically zero. So, but that's what it was like. And just like, throwing up on the boat, I look back in those traumatic days and I say, wow, those were great days. And I learned so much. I think when you look back on your life, you'll say that the hardest teacher and the hardest boss taught you the most. It might not be the most pleasant at the time. Vince Lombardi wasn't exactly a soft sell either. So I consider it an honor and a privilege, but a scary experience to have worked for Steve Jobs. Now, my advice, the question was, what's my advice for college graduates in terms of getting into tech and all that? I have general college advice. I think that, and it's natural because everybody does it, and I would do too. You think that your first job after college, you have to thread the needle, that you need to get this perfect job that, has a title that positions you well and has opportunity and is in an interesting place and offers work-life balance and all that bullshit. And I think that particularly the people who are entering the workforce now, when they look back, they're going to say, oh, what was my first job? I can't even remember. Was it Apple or Google? And so you're going to have 10 or 15 jobs in your career and you're sweating the first job. So let's take the two extremes of your first job. So at one extreme, you go to work for a startup and it becomes the next Google. And now you're 25 years old and you're worth 50 million bucks. Okay. Like just everybody's dream, just the best case. The probability is if that happens, you're going to be an insufferable asshole who cannot separate correlation from causation. You're going to think that you're great. In fact, you just got on a tsunami and survived. So that's the best case. Now, let's say it's the worst case. So you graduate and you go to work for a company like Theranos, because Theranos with one drop of blood is going to diagnose every ailment in humankind. And come to find out, Theranos was a big lie. Your CEO's indicted. Your CEO's in trouble. The company dissolves. It's all fake. And so you're tarnished by Theranos. I might make the case that you're going to learn more by working for Theranos about arrogance and dishonesty and, the herd mentality of all these famous people on the board of directors, all just rubber stamped every decision and all that. You're going to learn so much about what can go wrong in a company that you will learn not to do in your future companies, that maybe going to work for Theranos, which you think is the worst thing you could have ever done, might be the most valuable experience of your life. So all of this is for me to tell you that don't sweat your first few jobs. And I think what's most important is that you get into an industry that interests you, and you work your ass off and become very good at something, and the money will come. And that it's all about, like right now, for most college graduates, you have time, but not knowledge. People like me, we have knowledge, but no time because we're, 2/3 dead. So your key resource is time. So you have time. So explore things right now.
Oh, that's great advice. That's really great advice. Now, here's another question for someone a little more advanced in their career. What advice would you give for someone who's considering a career change with the goal of making the world a better place?
Well, I mean, how can you argue against that? But I'll tell you that I used to believe that change is good, and that in most cases, when you make a career change, the question you'll be asking yourself is, why did I wait so long, as opposed to why did I change? But having said that, I'll give you a completely different conflicting theory, which is that it's also been my experience. You're talking to a guy who quit Apple twice and turned down Steve for a third job, that sometimes rather than looking for greener grass, you should water the grass you're standing on. Because, as I said, if I had stayed at Apple, there would be at least a chair named after me. Maybe not a business school, but at least a chair.
Getting away a little from career advice, there's a question about Canva employees and adult education. And the question is, do they constantly train, and how do they constantly train among so much innovation and change that they're going through?
Boy, as Chief Evangelist of Canva, I am not exactly in any of the training programs. I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it's more a mindset than an actual training question.
Gwen, I think that's a very insightful observation, that it is a mindset that, there are training programs there for sure, But you know what? I think that things are in a company like Canva, or something that's experiencing such growth as Larry described. It's learning by doing, and honestly, in high growth companies, let's face it. I mean, you're just making it up as you go. And so, my podcast, Remarkable People, I've interviewed people who, and this is particularly true of women who started companies. I have a lot of female CEOs in my podcast. And over and over again, uh, women CEOs mentioned two factors. One is the imposter syndrome, that they had to overcome the imposter syndrome, that as a woman, they thought, oh, do I belong on this board of directors? Do I belong in this executive suite? Do I really belong uh, in this circle? Et cetera, et cetera. So number one, you got to get over the imposter syndrome, because frankly, everybody's an imposter at some level. So that's number one. And number two, what they had to overcome was they had to overcome the sort of hesitancy and guilt about faking it until you make it. And I will tell you that about 80% of entrepreneurship is faking it until you make it. And that's true whether you're Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, or two guys, two gals in a garage. That is a necessary skill for entrepreneurship. You need to learn how to fake it until you make it.
I think most people think there was a preordained plan to all of this, and they don't realize we're making it up as we go along. Passing on the mistakes.
I think the hindsight I have is it's not the quality of the plan, it's how fast you can change the plan. That's the key.
There's a lot of interest in Canva, and one of the questions is, how do you think Canva has or will affect the graphic design field going forward?
Well, there are some people who are entrenched in the graphic design field. And so let's say if you spent the last 10 years of your life learning Photoshop, and then along comes somebody with Canva, picks a template and makes something almost as good, if not better than you. So, it's hard to imagine that you're going to think, oh, hallelujah, let's democratize design. On the other hand, maybe that Photoshop designer is going to use Canva and kick out designs much faster than before and make more money. So hallelujah. The other impact of Canva might be that more people will be interested in design. And at some point, let's face it, at some point, Canva cannot do some things that Photoshop and Illustrator can do. So it might lead to more people being interested in design and more people going for the high end than before, because it's increased awareness of a skill set. But all of this is, we're not trying to put Photoshop and Illustrator out of business. We're trying to make people better communicators. So it's not necessarily a zero-sum game.
The last question along this line is Canva bad news for my daughter who is graduating with a graphic design degree from college next month?
Well, this is kind of a Rorschach test. So the case that it's bad news is that she spent 4 years learning how to design, and then someone can get a template from Canva and do almost as good, if not better. That would be the negative look. The positive look is someone who has the skills of design can use her skills and apply them more easily to a broader spectrum of products and be even more impactful, because she has an academic basis of her knowledge of design, not simply picking a template. So, to use a car analogy, I would say that, if you said to a person who wants to be a professional driver, who has trained for it and all that, and then all of a sudden Porsche comes out with just the slickest, most amazing automatic transmission that can shift gears faster than any human. It can shift gears in milliseconds. And when you downshift, it can downshift in milliseconds. It's not humanly possible. So you could make the case that, oh my God, I've been training to be a professional driver, using a manual, optimizing everything. And then Porsche comes out with a transmission that just beats the hell out of me. Anybody with 100 grand can walk into a Porsche dealer and get this car that has a better transmission than I can shift. But I would argue that if you've been trained as a professional driver and Porsche comes out with this transmission, you're going to be an even better driver. So it just depends on how you want to look at the world.
Okay. Okay, great advice. We have a question here for Scott. Will potential changes in technology that Guy has been discussing affect the services that the Field Center offers to small business owners? And if so, how?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've already started to change how we do what we do. But interestingly, and this goes back to Guy's comments about timing. We've also recently changed what we've done. And I think what we're doing now, by way of the pandemic, has made the things that we're doing even more important. So I just took some notes as Guy was putting on his dean hat and describing what an ideal curriculum would look like. He talked about behavioral economics, the social psychology of influence and persuasion, design, and then management and motivation. And about 2 years ago, we revised our entrepreneurship curriculum to focus on those very things. We have courses in design. We have courses literally called the art of persuasion. We have a course on how to manage small businesses. We have courses on developing an entrepreneurial mindset. So the sort of cognitive processes about finding good ideas and dealing with pain points and those sorts of things. We kind of got away from the business plan model of undergraduate education. And we had a vision for why we wanted to do that. We felt that was in the spirit of what entrepreneurship was really about. And the pandemic, I think, has brought that to the fore, right? Because we're focused now more on how to identify good ideas that solve real problems for real people. And to Guy's point about the communication piece of it, how do we physically manifest those problems in ways that we can sell them to potential users? This pandemic has made that more relevant because of the uncertainty that has come with it. And so there are so many new pain points that we're experiencing that we have yet to experience, and no real good solutions for them. So I think the way in which we'll serve our students going forward it is going to be magnified in positive ways based on the changes that we've made, and really through both the sort of foresight and hard work of our staff, but also just the fortunate consequences of the life that we're living now in the post-pandemic world.
Thank you, Scott. We have just time for just one last question, and this is for Larry. With the new technologies that may be developed in the future, do you see any new ethical challenges for corporations and for corporate citizens?
It's not only the ethical challenges to business, which will be enormous. It's the accelerating rate of change. We're not going through a rate of change. The rate of change is accelerating. Management is simply not ready for all this. I mean, we talked before about what's going on in the political world. I mean, look at the corporations trying to figure out how to respond to political donations they've been given for years, or the lawyers getting involved in how to advise those corporations. I have a good lawyer friend who said to me, the corporations are coming to us. I don't know what to tell them. I've never been through this before. And so the challenges are going to be enormous. And from an ethics point of view, it's going to be a very serious problem, and people will make terrible mistakes.
Well, let's hope the mistakes are manageable when they're made. We are out of time, and I want to thank you, Guy. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Scott, for this really interesting discussion. We will meet again next month. And again, thank you all.